All right. Okay. Well, nice to see you. Um, anyone want to start with something? Anyone want to share testimony or ask anything?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, it has been uh, just a few weeks of revelation. Um, I'm getting an understanding about the ley lines
All right.
and understanding why, even why the blueprint looks a little different than the benches or city of refuge. But God began to mandate the ley lines are like holy highways, like highways between the cities of refuge, uh, carrying power, communication, resources, food, um, keeping anarchy, the robbers off the highway. I'm like, oh my gosh. And the mapping out of things. He is, um, he has been gifting us with tools, and we didn't understand. Map makes tools. Gyroscopes. I mean, even an angel that seemed, I said he seems like he's with the Angel Army Corps of Engineers. He's a map man. So we've been like just ecstatic getting this revelation of how God is redeeming Layla, the power grid. Most of Christendom thinks it's a demonic grid, but it's not. It's just been done. So, I mean, it has been a whirlwind of revelation.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Yeah. Even like when I tell you like I have a mountain called adventure and how God takes me to all these places and you say, oh, but you got to build. Don't be an explorer or a pioneer. If you're a pioneer, build. The Lord said, I have met you. I have explored. And I'm like, oh, it's so much better. It's been awesome. It's been awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's okay to explore things as long as you know what you're mandated to do with them.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, if we don't actually become pioneers and take the ground, then all the exploring will ultimately just be information. So it is using it for whatever purpose God releases the things for. But certainly the ley lines and things like that are, um, very clearly something that God does use. But because Christians haven't embraced it, then they've not really benefited from, what it actually unveils. Um, so it's great. Yeah, good information. If you've got any stuff you've written down or anything like that, it'd be really useful to see it. Um, yeah.
All right, we will share. We will
Yeah.
share.
Yeah. Sounds good. Excellent. Yeah. I think a lot of things like that. Generally the whole sort of Christian community gets put off by, the negativity of the New Age and weird stuff, and just miss the fact that most of it's been counterfeited and just used for wrong, and God wants to restore the true revelation of those things to us, so that we can use them correctly. And I think there's been just the whole religious system just warns everyone off things rather than teaching people to be discerning. And if we're discerning, then we can chew the grapes and spit out the pips and see the real from the counterfeit and embrace, what was there for us that God had intended, that the enemy usually hijacked and then put it off limits. So that's good. Excellent. Okay. So who else wants to share or ask anything?
Mike,
Yeah.
I was going to see if you could elaborate on the four watcher angels that stand on the four corners of the earth holding back the four winds. I had inquired about that with the Lord and got a lot of revelation, but I wanted to hear what you had to say.
Not a lot really. um, I obviously the whole issues with fours being a windows and opening things, is a key, understanding for us to see those patterns of fours within Scripture and within what God is revealing. Obviously, four faces of God, and the four winds and four windows of heaven, and those four angels. I think the key to it is to engage where you need to. I'm much less inquisitive of needing to know things, and I realize that when I need to engage something, then I will be able to, and then the revelation will get opened up for me to actually encounter or use those things. I think some of it relates to what Jesus was referring to, those sent out to the four corners of the earth. Obviously, there aren't actually four corners of a sphere, but in terms of four dimensions, really is what it's talking about. That eventually will release a harvest, and will release heaven to engage earth in such a way that the harvest will come. Other aspects of the windows of heaven, in terms of the river of life, and I've seen the river of life flowing through windows into the atmosphere of the earth, and it's basically held back there until we deal with the atmosphere of the earth and are able to release it onto the earth. So there's sort of lots of different ways of viewing those windows. I think that there are pretty high level angels to have that responsibility and be involved in that. What was it that you felt God sort of show you about it? Is there anything we need to legislate into with those angels, or are they waiting for anything? What revelation did you get with it?
Well, the place that I was at, am I echoing? Can you all hear me echo?
No.
Okay, it's echoing back on me. The place where I was at just filled. The room was filled with what I believe was 4 archangels. And I don't want to go into a lot of the encounter, but it felt like a few minutes. When I came out of the encounter, it had been 2 hours. And so a lot of that is still just unpacking to me. But I really left with the impression that, and I know this sounds crazy, but that they were family. These 4 archangels, which I believe were Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, and Raphael, were somehow just now connected with them. But I never got the revelation of the 4 watcher angels, other than, that scripture holding back the 4 winds. But
Okay. Well, she seems to have disappeared there for some reason. Not sure what's going on with that, but okay. Well, has anyone got anything else until she comes back? Oh, there we go. Okay.
I have no idea what happened.
She's got bombed out. So. Okay. Yeah. So is there anything else with that? Or did you get a sense of their purpose, or I know that there's holding back the 4 winds, but there's also the 4 windows and other 4s that are associated with different realms of heaven.
Well, the revelation I was receiving really was that it was the angel armies of heaven, that they were there to guard, to defend, to enforce, to each one having their own position, and obviously the leaders of the armies. But I don't know. It's so personal and it's so real. And as I'm releasing the angelic, it's as if each has their own assignment. And I know this again sounds a little nuts, but it's kind of like we have in America: the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines. Everybody has their function, and it's just it's so personal. and just feel like they're unpacking. They're here. They're a part of, I think, assigned to what we're doing, and they want to be involved, and it just felt like family. And I know that sounds crazy, but there was just an adjoining that occurred there. And as I'm releasing, it's personal, and I don't know. Like I said, it's hard to explain.
Yeah.
I didn't know. The specific question I was engaged in was the 4 Watcher Angels, and so that's what happened when they came in. And there's just such an eagerness and a looking for alignment, I guess. But yeah, I just didn't know if you had any revelation to add to that.
Well, I think there's if you think of there's 4 Watcher Angels, and they are quite serious in terms of their authority. Think of the 200 Watcher Angels that fell before the flood, and you can imagine the amount of chaos and devastation that they were able to bring. You know, it's no wonder that the thoughts and intents of people's hearts were evil continually, having been polluted by that when they fell. Obviously, they weren't assigned to the earth to fall, but they obviously chose to leave their estate, and they are now, you know, locked up and chained in Tartarus. But I think there are a number of angelic things to engage with. There's the ordinances of heaven, which essentially like the troop movements, and you know, I think Pam was talking about it earlier about, you know, the sort of they're moving around, and you know, we tend to think of an army, you know, as fighters, but actually behind the army there's all sorts of different orders. You know, you have the intelligent units, you have the sort of engineers. You know, there's a whole host of different functions to make an army function. Those on the front line are only a small part of it, and there's so much about the chancellor's houses and the house of ordinances, where the angel armies and the angelic orders are being assigned and released and being put in place, and they're waiting for us to engage them. You know, we have 4 angels that engage with us, and they're examples of an order of angels that are specifically released to help the Joshua generation transition. You know, so we have, you know, transformation and winds of change and sound of many waters and refiner's fire, and they will go where they're invited. I mean, wherever I go anywhere, you know, I those angels, that order comes with me, and I usually release them and let them, and they stay if they're welcomed, and you can re-engage with them, and they're very much about transformation and bringing us into our identity and understanding it with the Joshua generation and what God's doing with that. There are some areas where we are called to take some of the roles that those angelic order are currently occupying in terms of chancellors' roles and judges, magistrates, and other areas, and God is raising up people with new mantles and scrolls for some of those areas so that we're actually involved. In the affairs of the nation's house, there are 9 thrones being prepared for people to occupy the 9 tectonic plates, which are currently occupied by fallen angels. And so there's a lot of activity in aligning and arranging the heavenly host, and you know, when we engage in our mountain and they recognize the authority when we're on our throne, then the whole canopy of angels is around us, you know, and the different orders of angels all have different functions, all have different roles, and we need to understand how to interact with them. You know, I encourage people when they go onto their mountain, and if they've got time, to go into those different spheres of government that those angels occupy. You know, so you know, I wouldn't start at the bottom of the sphere. I would engage with the living creatures, you know, and work your way down to the, you know, the Ishim, and because you know they're sort of very, very powerful, mighty ones. But they all have realms in which they operate in, and it's important that we learn how to administrate in those realms, and how to engage with them, and how to, because they're not. I think some people think that some of these things are just, well, the angels are just around like the atmosphere, and there's like a cloud or something, and they're all in it. I mean, these are dimensional spheres that they have rooms and benches and courts and all sorts of things in. Now we can call them, and they can come and engage with us. You know, we can go to the court of angels, and we can actually get them to come to those courts. But it's actually good to know what their domain is like, and you get clues to what they do and how they function by engaging with their domain. You know, and so there's a lot of necessary activity that we need to understand how to be involved with, so that we can correctly assign those angelic armies or the ordinances of God and the different companies that angels have, different functions, so that we can be participating and cooperating with them, and they with us. You know.
Yeah. One thing too that, like I said, it seemed like a few minutes, but it was a couple hours, and so as I get to go back there, I journaled some stuff right away, but as I go back, it keeps unpacking things that happened there. But one thing that kind of confused me is in this discovery is they were tied to the four faces of God. That Michael is the ox, Gabriel is a lion, Uriel is an eagle, and Raphael is a man. And I don't see a lot of teaching about that, and I just want to make sure I'm not, you know, trying to put something together that's not supposed to be together. But
sure, yeah, I mean, there's a sense where there's a difference between orders of angels and angels themselves. And so there are angelic orders that have many different named angels within those orders, and often there is a head of that order, and you know, it's looking to identify the order gives the function, but the name is what you engage with the personality and the person of that, you know, of that angelic being. In a sense, you're really identifying the fact that they're cherubs. So, you know, in a sense, they are the cherubim, and you know, they have functions within that. But they also, you find in the canopy of angels, you find actually Michael and Raphael and Uriel. They have functions within the other orders of angels, which means that they're not necessary of that order, because they're of the order of the cherubim, but they have a function in ruling and governing in certain areas. But you know, I think the main thing in it is to actually engage and to operate in cooperation with, understanding, you know, that you know, are they the four faces? Well, they can manifest in many different ways. You know, sometimes they manifest in human form. You know, sometimes you have the manifestation of the four faces of God is God's four faces. It's not the cherubim, because the cherubim reflect the four faces of God, and they each reflect a face, but actually God is all four faces. And we're also supposed to connect and represent those four faces of government as well. So it's the form and the function. They have a function, but they also have forms, and we can discern quite a lot from what form that they are in when we engage them, because often that is symbolic of what they're doing. You know, so we often have a manifestation of the four faces of God, or those four living creatures, in our meetings, but I'm sure lots of other places do as well, and that means that they're either multifunctional in that they're an order, or they are able to be in more than one place at one time. And so are they omnipresent? Well, they're represented as the four faces of God. So there's more than we understand about how angels function and how they can operate in those things. And I don't have the cognitive understanding of it. My spirit is engaged a lot more, and I know a lot of what to do instinctively when I engage them, but I couldn't tell you often how in a cognitive way unless I get that revelation released to share. But often once I've experienced something, then I would then journal it, and then I have more of an understanding of how those things work. But I'm not always allowed to say. Sometimes I just don't get any permission to say things yet. And I'm not going to go against anything that God says. So, and eventually, sometimes it's taken me 3 or 4 years to get to the point where I've been allowed to share something. And I just have to be obedient and open. Now, that doesn't sort of, there's nothing sinister about that. There's just times and seasons, and there are many people who are forerunning things. I'm sure you are, and some of these things that you're experiencing, you'll be able to help other people when they need to connect and understand that. I think the great thing is that it's not all down to 1 or 2 or 3 people who are engaging these things. God is calling all of us to actively engage in the heavenly realms and to begin to engage the courts and have charge of the courts, and therefore charge of the angelic orders, because that's what the authority is, to carry that level of authority in that way. But I must say, it's like when I engage with them, there's a sense of mutual respect. I don't treat them like slaves. That they are very, very powerful beings, and I treat them as such. We don't worship them because we worship God, but I think there's a sense of honor and respect. And I know, again, I think a while ago we were talking about honoring them and creating a culture of honor for them in a way which then releases them to operate in a way. I know Pam Green had a whole encounter with that, about honoring them and therefore being able to connect to them. I think we're just scratching the surface. It is like that. There's a definite relational connection that we need to be respectful and mindful of in the right way. And of course they never want to draw attention to themselves. Their desire is always to bring glory and honor to God. So there's always that you always get that from them. They're never. Sometimes they can be fun, and sometimes they can be almost mischievous sometimes, but there's always a sense of you know that they have a deep honor and respect and love for God, and that comes over when I've certainly engaged them. But to be honest, it's like I'm not always allowed to do everything with these things. God sort of moves me on to something else before I get a chance to really put a lot of things into practice. But just to encourage other people to do it. I think that's the thing. We all need to do what we're called and mandated to do, and that will open up the avenues for being able to do it. And I think for some that will be having a very clear heavenly engaging with the ordinances of heaven and different things, and some of it will be more of a administrating that into the earth and different things. But it's all good. Yeah. So, excellent. Okay. Anyone else got anything they want
to? Hey, Mike, this is Steven.
Oh, yeah.
Just want to get your thoughts real quick. There's 22 letters in the alphabet, actually 24. There's 2 missing. Which I've figured out which the 23rd is, and I'm still looking for the 24th. But what would you, or what's your opinion about, or could those be the 24 elders?
I know, the whole teaching about the living words and them being living creatures and living beings, and I know a lot of people have had encounters with that. I can't say for myself I've ever encountered it in that way, but I know that I'm encountering the revelation that's released in engaging God. And I remember hearing one of Ian's friends, Carl, I think, is it Carl Whitehead? Well, he shared his encounters with the living letters, and he shared the living letters, that how they form the word peace, and then he released revelation of encountering the letters in the sense of their meaning in peace. And I I wrote down what he said, and then checked with my personal experiences and found that I had exactly the same revelation in virtually identical way, but I didn't engage the living letters. I was encountering God in talking to Jesus, who's the living Word. So in a sense, I think as long as we're receiving the revelation of the Word, the living Word, whether it comes through engaging the letters or not, I think probably doesn't matter too much. But are they engaged with the 24 elders? Quite possibly. When I've engaged the court of the councils of the fathers, and I've engaged those 24 elders, they were beings. I didn't sort of see them in a pictorial form as letters, but quite possibly that they could have an associated aspect to that, because they operate in a very high level place in terms of the court of the councils of the fathers, and they authorize very high level things when I've engaged there. So quite possibly, I think that's the sort of revelation that may well get unfolded, and all these things are layer upon layer and layer upon layer, and there's so many different levels of revelation to everything. I think the Hebrew understanding of revelation of words and letters is, there's four distinct levels, like plain and hidden and secret, but there's usually 70 facets to every layer, so that there's an amazing depth of revelation that we can receive, and we may get one level of revelation and then go deeper and deeper and deeper, and it may be that the revelation of their connection to the 24 letters could be just another depth of revelation of their who they are and what they do and how they function. So if you have more revelation about that, I'm sure that will unveil it more. Although I can't say I've got a personal experience of them as living letters, I certainly have a personal experience of their function, and they certainly would be releasing the word in a way which could well be linked to that. So yeah. I think a lot of
I got a question.
Yeah.
Since we started with you, all kind of things has happened for the good, and I found that I knew this before we started with you. My last name is Cowart, and my heritage comes from England area. I don't know where exactly, but I asked the Lord, given that, I asked the Lord what my angel was, and He showed me an angel standing off the coast of Wales. It was a big, daunting angel, and I asked him his name, and he said Prince, and I don't know what to do with it. You have any input? I just see him standing there, and that's it.
Well, uh, it totally depends on the mandate that you are operating in at any particular time. You know, if you're given a mandate to engage Wales, or what Wales means in that sense, some of it is, is it Wales, or does Wales represent something? And whenever I sort of have something like that which I'm unsure about, what does it mean? I'm really looking for, does I ask questions like to God, does Wales means I have something with the physical country, or does that physical country represent something? Therefore, I need to understand why you're showing it me in that context. And then once you start to get some revelation about that, then you can begin to unpack, why it is that you're seeing that or engaging it in that way. Because Wales as a nation, has a redemptive purpose and a redemptive gift in God, and has obviously in the past released things like the Welsh Revival and other things. The Company of Burning Hearts and all those guys are in Wales, and there's a sense there, and they have a heritage, which may be complementary to what you're called to do, or it may just be the symbolic nature of Wales that God's wanting to connect you to. But if you find out and you have something specific in terms of, okay, for Wales, or you have some sort of mandate to release what you're doing into Wales, then then that angel could be the gateway in. Because if you have an angel that's saying it's a prince, then it's usually a prince warring angel over the nation or the region. I mean, when I've engaged the angel of our region, I mean, it's absolutely huge. I mean, it's enormous, and it's some sense is almost difficult to imagine how big it is. But when I engage it, it's almost like I can talk to it face to face, even though when I perceive it, its stride is 75 miles long, so it straddles our whole region. So it's really, really large. But when I engage it, it doesn't appear that way because I'm just talking face to face with it. But in reality, when I sort of draw back, it's just like very, very impressive, and has a very strong regional mandate. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
Thank you. It is very large. It seems like you say, 75 miles tall. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. But, there will definitely be a significance to the encounter, and I think it's, God will unveil that as it's important. And some of these things, I've had encounters like that which meant nothing to me for a while, until a particular time or a particular season, then it opened up. I mean, I saw the angel over our region quite a while ago, and I began to engage with that angel, understood what its function was because it had particular things in its hand. But it was a couple of years later that then I was able then to begin to administrate and legislate what it was doing. And we just actually had a regional gathering a few weeks ago in which that angel was present and began to engage the people there with some specific mandates and things to dig some wells and unblock some wells and do some things and bring fire into things. Whereas I saw it 2 or 3 years ago, and I understand what it's doing because it relates to other visions that I've had, but I didn't really have any way of outworking that. So I began to seek God for a strategy of what I needed to do, and and we established a bench of 3 in our region, and then together we began to engage God together, and we had a strategy to release a sound, and so we released a sound. And that was, and it was like, how do you release a sound? Well, we released a sound spiritually in heaven, but we also released a sound in a way. We sent an email out, which was a very cryptic email, and we just, because we felt that's what God say to do, send it out. And then for 18 months we did nothing, you know, but we waited, and we waited for whatever happened to begin to do what it needed to do. And then we felt God say, now you need to call in those who were touched by that sound. And so we sent, and sent an invitation out to people to gather, and those that gathered, we had a great time, engaging heaven. And very interestingly, one of the things that I believe God is doing in this season is to start to challenge our preconceived ideas about the boundaries that we've put on maps, and how we've identified and made maps in man's likeness and image. And the territory that most maps are formed in is usually through conquest or war, whereas God is actually reforming the boundaries of maps to a heavenly perspective, which is why ley lines and things like that are connected to some of those things, because they don't respect human maps and state boundaries and other things like that. And we tend to get very focused on our state and our place and our country, and it can be quite nationalistic, and actually God doesn't view it in the same way. And he has, in the temple in heaven, there are maps, and those maps are moving and shifting, and the boundaries are shifting. So when we engaged heaven locally, and we have in our region, the southwest region, we have 5 counties, which are quite small compared to your states, but they're areas within the nation. So we have Cornwall and Devon and Somerset and Gloucester and Wiltshire and Dorset, and they're all distinct counties. They have local government in their counties and various things. But we sort of sat people down, and we asked them to, in the afternoon, to sit together in their where their sort of boundaries are, and then we asked them to seek God about where they should be. And that was really interesting, because several groups of people moved as they felt God call them to align themselves with a different group. And I think God is beginning to do those type of things if we're willing to let him. But we have to let go of sort of our worldly way of thinking about places, because we can get very attached to places, and therefore can think that place is it, and actually God is wanting to reshape nations as well, not just sort of within nations, but some of the boundaries that exist are purely man-made, and God does not hold those boundaries. So some of those things are quite interesting in what God's doing, and we may have to get involved in some of those legislative things towards boundaries, and be willing to embrace something new and different, which would be quite a challenge to people who do have a strong nationalistic view of things. And we've got decisions that we have to make in our nation. You've got elections coming up and things, and we've got a referendum that's on whether we should stay in Europe or leave Europe in terms of being part of the European Union. And my natural reaction to that would be one thing, and actually I'm feeling in God wants me to think another way, because his bigger picture doesn't really need my natural instinct to agree with. And the same thing when it comes to voting and all those sorts of things. Are you going to vote according to your preference? And that's usually you vote on 2 ways. Either you're voting for personal interest, are you going to get the tax breaks, and are you going to be more comfortable or better off with this party in power? Or sometimes people vote on the wider social context. I've always voted on a wider social context. I've never really thought about, well, what's going to benefit me. but I always think, well, how are the worst off going to be benefited because no one looks after them, and I voted that way, out of sort of almost principle, but as I've been engaging God recently around some of these things, and particularly about this referendum, he basically has told me that that my voting preferences have not taken into account what he wanted, and he has a bigger picture that he wants us to see when it comes to those type of issues. And if we're looking to legislate into things, we really need to make sure that we're on God's side in it. And that might not be the thing that makes us most comfortable or gives us, okay, yes, we're going to have a government that's going to really, enforce our strength in the world and all that stuff. Well, God may actually want to do something totally different, and he may choose someone that we wouldn't choose because he sees the bigger picture, and we have to start seeing the bigger pictures as well. So it'll be really interesting, and God really challenged me over this, over what my attitude would be if he told me to vote for the opposite party than I would normally vote. And I had to say I was challenged, because of course we all think that God is going to be voting the same way we would, that's the way I thought. Of course God is going to vote the same way I do because I'm coming with God's heart for this. But I now see a much bigger picture to it, and when I look at the choices you've got on voting, it's like good luck, but actually God has a purpose involved with it, and I think there's a bigger picture that I think we really need to understand, because if you don't understand it, then you can be very much in a negative thing. In our last general election, there was a really surprising result. All the opinion polls and everything else were saying one story, and actually it was there was all sorts of conspiracy theories and all sorts of stuff going around and everything else, and I actually was personally disappointed by the result, but I took a step back and looked for, what are you doing? Is this part of your bigger plan to bring your purposes in our nation aligned and outworked? And therefore I have to honor that, and therefore I never dishonor the government, even if I don't agree with what they're doing or their policies or anything else. I never dishonor them, because I believe that God has placed them there, and it may not be to do what I would like them to do, but he has a bigger thing there. So it would be really interesting if people are willing to seek him about that, so we can cooperate. Because I look at some of the posts on some of the Facebook things that are there, particularly from people in the US, and they're so disparaging about the government and various things and all these policies and everything else, and I'm just thinking, it's they're not seeing the bigger picture, and I think we do need to, if we're gonna hold any sort of level legislative governmental things to this, we need to cooperate with God and not work against him, and that means being willing to lay down our personal preference for seeking God. Now, it's whether you can hear God or not is the issue, because sometimes it's so hard to hear him over our own voice and our own thoughts, and he certainly has challenged me recently, because I know I really feel that the way God wants me to vote in this referendum is not the way I personally want to vote, which is going to be a real challenge, so it's interesting.
Hi, Mike. I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
On a previous hangout, I had heard you say that we, as God's people, as the sons of God, can become a boundary stone.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of the people group that the Lord has given us a mandate for, that we have a blueprint for. What does that look like to be a boundary stone for a people group?
No idea really, but in a sense, a boundary stone carries with it what has been spoken into its fabric, and therefore it carries the authority and power. So in the Bible, when you see the boundary stones that were set up by Joshua, and they were set up by Gideon and others, they couldn't be crossed, because what they spoke into it continued to resonate with that and formed a spiritual barrier that was not actually stopped armies coming into the nation and everything else. I have a piece of rock that comes out of the Joshua boundary stones in the area that he spoke. I think I got it from David Vancouvering, I think. He had these stones cut from the rock in Israel where Joshua spoke. So I thought, okay, well, it's an interesting thing, and actually that still resonates in that stone. Even after all this time, there's still something in it, because when we speak and when light and sound engage something, it stores it within the fabric of that material. So like this room is filled with all the things that go on in these hangouts and everything else, because everything is recorded. And we know that from the point where sometimes you go into a place and it feels quite dark and cold, and because there are things that have gone on there which are stored in there, and of course we can release them, and we can ministrate and legislate into those things to shift it. But so if it's a person is a boundary stone, then you have to be resonating with what God says, and you become that voice, if you like, for what God says for that people group. So you may be the voice which brings justice or righteousness or restricts something happening, but that's why the mandate will give you what you're authorized to do. It's not that my boundary stone or me being a boundary stone can affect every single thing. It's only very specifically what the mandate authorizes you to be able to carry within yourself, and then you can be that for that people group, because obviously it will be part of your mountains and you have authority into it. But it is I would say there are decrees and declarations that would need to be made directly for that boundary stone and what it's actually authorizing to do. We have 7 boundary stones here, which are our 7 mountains, and those boundary stones they all have declarations that they've made, and as boundary stones they then form a canopy over us, which God has shown us that we need to have. So they have things like that which need to be maintained. And I don't believe you could be a boundary stone to anything that you didn't carry in your heart. You have to carry it in your heart. That gives you the governmental right to anything. Carrying it in your heart, the desire in your heart for it, for God's purposes to be outworked through it, and then our boundary stones and our decrees, our mountain benches, they carry that responsibility to daily administrate that, because it's one of these things which is that everything starts afresh every day, and that's why we need to operate daily with authority and with a mandate, not just an assumption that, well, I did something yesterday and it's okay. It's like, no, I carry it in me. If I'm going to be a boundary stone, then I have to legislate that on a daily basis. Now, that doesn't mean that I might have to go through hours and hours of things. I might have to go through hours and hours of things of establishing the boundary stone and what it is, and then I can release it on a daily basis. So for me, I do that in that my spirit is expanding and covering larger ground than what it used to, because I'm expanding it and pushing it outwards. And so I in a sense, I encompass around a people group, which is our church. I encompass my family, I encompass the church, I encompass our area and region, and I have different functions and different levels of government in each of them. But I still am able to rule into those areas, and I'm practicing doing that on a daily basis, and I release a sound into those areas, but I carry them in my heart. I know that I have authority towards it because it moves me. I've cultivated that desire in my heart for it, and my attitude to those things have changed because of that desire in my heart, and I carry a love for certain things that I never did before, as I've spent time with God, and that develops a desire which then releases authority. And so I would say that you can be a boundary stone by getting your spirit to encompass that group. You may have to set boundary stones. There may be more of you, than just you, but you could effectively, you essentially put a covering around, or you're just expanding your spirit around, and therefore you can begin to legislate into the atmosphere. And if it's a people group, then that would be, I think, would probably be something that began to develop, and the authority that you carried would begin to increase as you were diligent and vigilant. Most things you just don't do once. A lot of the things we have to do consistently and in an ongoing way, because the enemy's activity in those areas is consistent and ongoing. He doesn't take a day off. It's like his plans and purposes are to rob, kill, and destroy, and he never lets up. So we also can't take holidays from who we are. Yes, we can have holidays, some activities, and I do, but I'm still me. And I can still rule and legislate when I'm doing something different, or when I'm, in a sense, not in my normal environment. My spirit is still able to connect. When I'm on a holiday, or when I'm on a cruise somewhere, or I'm in another nation, it does not stop me, because we're talking about a spiritual dynamic, not a physical one. And so you can continue to increase your governmental influence into those areas once you've established that area that you're administrating into. So yeah, it sounds like something that God's definitely doing.
Thank you so much. Okay. That clarifies a lot of things.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay.
Mike, I have a question about the skins. When we present ourselves as a living sacrifice, we ask the three skins of Jesus, the way, the truth, the life, the three skins of the Holy Spirit, righteousness, peace, and joy, and the Father, justice, judgment, and holiness, to be clothed, for them to clothe us. And when I hear people talk about this, they include our three skins for a total of 12. I'm just curious, does our skins have names applied to them? Have you got anything on that?
Yeah. Lots on that, really, because I've been engaging in that for quite a while, since 2008. I think I've been engaging in those sort of 9 stone skins, different ways of viewing DNA strands. they are really, when we begin to engage in a deeper level of intimacy with God, and you can engage those 9 levels there, because there are nine skins, 9 stones, 9 strands of DNA, 9 firestones, 9 fruit of the Spirit. There's lots of 9s, which are all really referring to the same thing, but at different levels of understanding and experience. And when I'm baptized into the Holy Spirit, and I embrace the river of life, and I'm skinned with His presence, and I'm in Him. Therefore, I have the armor of light around me. When I'm baptized into Jesus, I have obviously those 3 skins: way, truth, and life. But there are also 3 of the fruits of the Spirit that are associated with Father, Son, and Spirit. There's also 3 governmental aspects that are associated with it. There's ultimately 12, because 12 is the fullness of government, and there were 12 stones on the high priest's breastplate, not 9. And there were 9 stones covering Satan's body, reflecting the 9 firestones of revelation that we were to come into maturity as sons of God. And Adam and Eve would have encountered those firestones with Lucifer, because that was his assignment, if they continued their journey. And we now can re-engage that. So there are lots of places you can engage that. The dance floor, where the 9 strands of DNA engage us, and they begin to encode us with the revelation of those things, and there are multi-levels again. I've experienced probably 3 or 4 different levels in some of those things, the firestones particularly, which have been amazing. I mean, my first experience with those things, I didn't think there could be any more than that. It was such an amazing experience, and then the next time it was, I was expecting something the same, and it was just at a completely different level, and then again, and eventually it engaged at such an eternal level that I was completely thrown by it. It completely changed me from when I engaged it at that level. So yeah, I think when we're baptized into that, into the river of life, there are 3 places within the river of life where you can engage the Holy Spirit, engage Jesus, engage the Father, and literally you're in sense have the armor of light, the armor of righteousness, and the armor of God, which are made up of those things. For our 3 skins, basically body, soul, and spirit, those are our 3 skins. Now we have natural 3 skins, because everything has 3 layers. God made things with 3 layers, and you find your physical body has 3 layers of skin. The dermis, epidermis, and I can't remember what the third one is. And you have 3 skins on the heart, and you have 3 in the atmosphere. I mean, 3. The whole thing with 3 obviously is a governmental thing, and we have a governmental perspective to play, which is why there are 4 faces of God, not 3. Because we have a part to play in the man aspect to bring our government to form 12. And there's a lot around that. That as you encounter those things, you just get more and more of a revelation. So I'm always looking for a deeper revelation of when I'm in the presence of God, and I'm stepping into the 4 faces of God, or I'm every day I sort of want to be baptized in the river of life and be baptized into the Father, Son, and the Spirit, so that I'm in them, and therefore they're in me and I'm in them. And if they're the Father's on the throne of my life, then I'm in Him, then I can rule in Him, in that way. So there's a lot about it, really. I mean, it's quite an interesting subject. I don't know any other name other than body, soul, and spirit, because that's the 3. In a sense, you have Father, Son, and Spirit. They have aspects of them, and I think potentially when you begin to engage body, soul, and spirit and come to an understanding of how body, soul, and spirit function together, and the sort of unity and the oneness that comes when we begin to function, then we have probably 3 things that go with each of those 3 things ourselves. And so the 9 fruit of the Spirit would be, connected to those 3 skins. There are 9 governmental perspectives that are connected with those 3 things. But ultimately, we want to really be whole. And so now I don't tend to think about the separation of it, but just the flowing together, which is, what I'm looking to do when I'm expanding my spirit out. I'm looking to flow. So I'm looking to be joined to the Lord and one spirit with Him. And then I'm looking to sort of encompass my soul, and my soul is very happy for my spirit to be joined, and then flow out. And that only really happened, in that the separation of soul and spirit brought an integration of soul and spirit, which now means that I can be living in dual realms where I could never do that before. I could only, until my soul was dealt with in the dark cloud, I always had to be where my spirit was, because I needed to know. I've sort of shared this a lot. My need to know was the essence of who I am and how God made me, because He made me with a desire to know, so that I can explain and help people understand and teach and whatever. But there was a aspect of that which was very much independent, and therefore used to maintain independence of the soul. So whenever I went into the realms of heaven, my soul went with me, with my spirit, because I needed to understand what was going on, which meant I could never be in dual realms, because I was either soul and spirit in the realm of heaven or soul and spirit in this realm, which was why I was stepping in and stepping out. Well, I don't do any stepping in and stepping out anymore. I'm just in. But I'm connected completely with soul and spirit, so my spirit is there functioning fully, and my soul is here functioning fully, and they're totally complementary to one another. And my spirit in heaven can still flow through me and come around those spheres of influence, and bring heaven into those spheres of influence, because I'm connected. But until I got separated and then reintegrated, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. My soul wouldn't let me do it. But now it's very happy to cooperate, and I feel whole, like I've never done before. So yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, time's up, I think.